What's up there, gunfighters? Today, we're going to attempt the almost impossible. Comparing the 223-556 to the 308-762-51. Can it be done? Can it be done in such a way as to not bore to tears the people that don't go to bed and look at ballistics charts? So don't sit there and mull over ballistics and velocities and bullet construction. Ballistics nerds, if you will, like myself. To the average person, the average even gun owner. But also be interesting to the ballistics nerds. That's a tall order. Well, gunfighters, let's give that a shot today on Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns and gunfighting the right way. Don't mind those extra awesome sound effects. That is just my 100 and some pound Rhodesian Ridgeback Alexander Hamilton chewing on his squeaky toy pumpkin spice latte. Where was I? The podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, use of force the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am your host, Michael Milito. I am going to put in a bio because I think it's relevant when I give you thoughts and opinions based on my training and experience that you know what those are. If you've listened a lot and you know a little bit about my background, because I certainly don't disclose everything when I do the bio, skip a few minutes ahead. But I think it's germane, right? That's one of the reasons I do the podcast, because it's not just some dude sitting there looking at ballistics tables. Somebody that's used these things in real life, that's been to war, that's been a law enforcement officer, that's been a private contractor. So I'm going to put in the bio, and then we'll get into the topic. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio, and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as an instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other three-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a three-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast, and elk and bear and wolf, and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Enough about me, guys. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. Let's get into today's topic. Where do I start on this journey comparing the 223 and the 556? Comparing apples and oranges. Well, I guess I'm going to start on the nerdy side to give you some numbers, because I think for a lot of people that they're like, oh yeah, I want a gun to protect my family. I want a gun to defend liberty. I want a gun for whatever. And you get these two diametrically opposed camps. You think a lot of people get emotionally invested in cartridges. And I'm going to try and not do that and be circumspect here today. And they're like, it's all about the 5.56. It's America's rifle. It's the modern battlefield death laser beam. And there's the guys in the other camp. It's got to be 308. There's no room for real men to have those miniature poodle shooting calibers like the 5.56, and you're kind of like, what is going on here? So let's give you some real numbers, and that'll give you an idea of just how apples and oranges these things are, just how drastically different these rounds are. If you look at the world of ballistics, right, if you look at comparing something that gets a lot of arguments like the 9mm versus a 40 Smith & Wesson, right, you look at the amount of energy difference between those two, then look at the amount of difference between a 2.23 and a 5.56. It really is apples and oranges. It's like, what's the best vehicle for me? And it's like it's not like comparing, a Dodge Ram to a Ford F-150. It's like comparing, what's the best vehicle for me? A Ford Focus or a Ford F-150? Right? That really depends. They're totally different things made for different purposes. So let's look at some numbers. Now, I'm going to start out with the 308, the 7.62x51 Nato, in that order because it was released first as a civilian cartridge. It was developed, developed for the government by Winchester and probably some other people, as it bears the Winchester name, but it was released first to sportsmen before the military jumped on it and officially adopted it. But in service 1954 to present. 1954 to present. And I'm going to cite, by my own knowledge and what I know about the cartridge, and also from Wikipedia, and if I go to any other sources, I'll try and note those too to give credit where credit is due. But obviously, well, maybe not obviously, during the First and Second World War, we used the 30-06, the storied, legendary 30-06. But, that cartridge was developed even earlier, like 1903. The first version was kind of formalized on. So it predates that. You're talking turn of the last century. We came quite a long way in ballistics and our understanding of warfare and many other things. And the military looked at this and they said, we kind of like the performance of this. Can we get the same performance and make it smaller? Now, take it easy, you 308 guys, and take it easy, you 30-06 fans, because I like the 30-06. The goal kind of was, as I understand it, can we get the same performance in the military loading, the military 30-06 loading, in something smaller and more compact and lighter? I think yes, they did. Now, for defense of the 30-06, with heavier bullets, if you use the same modern technology in the 30-06, it's still a more powerful cartridge than the 308. The 308 is not the same as a 30-06. The military loading they adopted was very similar in performance to the very old original military 30-06 loading, but you can load 30-06 a lot hotter and you can load a lot heavier bullets. But with that on the table, because that's outside the parameters of today's discussion, they said, how can we get the similar performance of the 06 and put it in a 30 caliber cartridge, because they like the 30 caliber, in a shorter, lighter package, and hence the 308 and 7.62x51 Nato is born. Now, obviously, Nato uses metric because, yeah, that's what they do. Let's put that on the table too. I don't even want to talk about that. Quick note, it's the opposite of 308 and 5.56. Quick PSA, public service announcement. Commercial 308 is loaded to higher standards than military 7.62x51 Nato. If you move over to the 223 for a minute, 223 is loaded to lesser pressures than 5.56. Kind of confusing, but make sure the rifle can handle the ammunition that you're putting it in. In most cases, for 308, you're good to go. There may be some old, like Ishapur or something, some old military surplus that was chambered in 7.62x51 that will not handle the higher pressures of 308. You may run into some bolt guns or some older guns chambered in 223 that should not handle the 5.56. I'm not going to get into the minor variations of that. It's outside the scope. It's already going to be a long, tedious episode. Anyway, the 308. Wow, this is going to be a long episode, guys. It's 10 minutes in, and we're just talking about the development of the 308. Okay, so they get this lighter, handier cartridge. Why? Why even bother if the 30-06 is so good? Well, just because something's good doesn't mean it can't be better. And again, with modern propellants and technology and stuff like that, let's make it shorter. In making it shorter, you get a few things. You get more efficient powder burn. Powder burns more efficiently in shorter, fatter cartridges, as far as proportions go, as opposed to long, skinny cartridges. So you get a little bit more efficiency there. That may aid some of the accuracy that is often touted as this 308. I think a lot of that is not exactly true. I think a lot more of that has to do with barrel construction and the rifles it's chambered in. But also a big advantage that you can get is for the military. If you're carrying lots of ammo, like you're doing a beach landing, I was a Marine, you do a beach landing and you're trying to carry hundreds of rounds for machine guns on a beach without drowning, without, getting shot, firepower versus mobility, I can carry more ammo both on the landing craft and an aircraft, whatever the case is, if it's lighter. Now, the difference for a practical individual rifleman, if you're carrying an individual loadout between 308 and 30-06, is kind of negligible. You probably wouldn't even notice it if you're carrying 100 rounds of each. But you certainly notice it if you're an aircraft or a landing craft or something carrying thousands and thousands of rounds. Or if you're going to war and shipping millions of rounds on, a cargo ship. It certainly makes a difference. So for the military, it makes sense. Also, what you might notice as an individual rifleman, the entire rifle is shorter because the action, the part that has to reciprocate, or the bolt that has to move to chamber said round, if the round is shorter, that entire section of the rifle, likewise, can be shorter. That makes a difference to an individual rifleman. Very much can. I think in a bolt action, the speed difference between short action and long action is often overplayed, but it is a real thing. And the overall handiness of the short action versus the either long action or standard action, depending on your nomenclature and your vernacular, that does make a difference. So, bam. It's 1954-ish, and we've got this new cartridge, the 308. Let us look at some numbers. And this is per Wikipedia. You might get some slightly varying things in ballistics, but 147 grain bullet at 2,800 feet a second. 147 at 2,800. There's nothing outstanding about that load. It's a pretty vanilla load. 147 at 2,800 for 2,559 foot-pounds of energy. Now let's get into the 5.56 by 45 Nato. Now, we did all that talking about all the development on that cartridge in the early 50s, and very short as far as military goes. Not long after that, the military dropped that round like it was hot for the average infantryman. They kept it for machine guns and for many other roles it's still in use. But for the infantry, they dropped that thing like it was hot. It was a very short-lived, maybe only shorter than like the 30-40 Krag or something way back in the 1800s, but a very short-lived cartridge. They decided they wanted to go a different way. They wanted a high-velocity, light round. We talked about the weight savings and stuff. You get a little bit of weight savings when you go from 30-06 to 308. You get a giant weight advantage when you talk about 5.56 or 2.23. It's a giant weight advantage. And this is not just a modification of or a development change in 30-06 or the 30 caliber cartridge. This is a fundamentally different philosophy in infantry war fighting. We want more cartridges, we want lightweight, we want high velocity. That's what we want. They didn't adopt it because of the AR-15 later become the M16. They wanted this. I think that's an important distinction. The Eugene Stoner, as I understand it, his first rifle was an AR-10. It was chambered in the current military cartridge, which was 308, which was 7.62 by 51. He developed that rifle, as I understand, as a hunting rifle for him and his wife. The military looked at the rifle, they liked it, but they wanted a different cartridge. So they scaled it down. They scaled it down from a civilian hunting version to a military version. This development, so whether it came exactly from the 222 Remington or the 222 Remington Magnum or some version thereof, it's very similar. And they came up with the 223 Remington or the 5.56. There is a difference. The 5.56 can be loaded and sometimes is loaded hotter. Outside the scope of this, make sure your rifle can fire what you want. But a totally different departure. Much, much lighter weight. How much lighter, you ask? Well, let's do some real world science. I just looked around me and I just happened to have a 150 grain, which is real close to the 147 grain, 308 round. Let's put it on the scale. It weighs, and this is vacillating back and forth between. Alright, so let's zero out this scale here. Hit the tare. This is portions of an ounce. Riveting audio, I know. 0.85, let's call it. 0.85 ounces for the 308. And for the 5.56, 0.39. That is not a trivial amount. That is, less than half. And those are rough numbers because I'm using a food scale. But you get the idea there. That's less than half. That is a giant weight savings. With such weight savings, what kind of ballistics are we talking about? Talking about the actual ballistics of the round. Okay, and that was a round that I weighed. It was not an XM193, but same grain weight, right? The XM193 is a very common loading, probably the most common for American civilians. You're talking about a 55 grain at 32.60. Now this is out of a 20-inch barrel. Probably much more common today is a 16-inch barrel. But let's sally forth with these numbers. You're talking 55 grain at 32.60 for foot-pounds of energy of 1294. Again, foot-pounds 1294 for the older 308. 2559. That's a giant difference. Also, you're talking a 55 grain bullet to a 147. Not quite 3 times as heavy, but quite a bit heavier. Although the velocity, as you might imagine, is quite a bit higher. We're comparing a 22-inch barrel on the 308 to a 20-inch barrel on the 5.56. You start dropping down on the 16-inch or shorter barrels, you start to see very similar velocities to the longer barrel of the 308, or at least more similar. But if you compare these, we're already comparing apples to oranges. Let's not get crazy. You're launching a lighter bullet much, much faster with the 223. You're also getting a much lighter weight. I'm not going to lie, there are some very distinct advantages to this. A big one, if you're an infantryman, is you can carry more ammo. And I don't care how much you say, just man up and be stronger and carry more. As an infantryman, there is a limit to that, where you start becoming like a tactical ninja turtle, where you just have so much superfluous stuff that you lose mobility. And I don't care how much ammo you have, if you're literally a sitting duck or a turtle running around the battlefield or attempting to run, and you just have so much stuff that you can't move fast, that's bad. And guns and ammo, as much as we might like them, is not the only thing that you have on the battlefield. You have, very important, medical. You have comms. You ever ruck with a PR or Prick 19 radio? Ugh. Or how about all your other battle kit? 3 days worth of food, water, body armor, literally heavy plates strapped to your front and back, and the myriad of other things. If you have, let's say, 20 pounds I'm just throwing out a number, 20 pounds allotted for ammo. You can carry a lot more, probably double or so with the 5.56 versus the 308. Also, a very distinct advantage. As you might imagine from those numbers I threw out, the 5.56 is a lighter bullet at much greater velocity. At what I would call practical warfighting distances inside of 500 yards, which is the vast majority of military engagements in the past, probably forever. There are outliers, there are long engagements, but the vast majority of combat ever since, World War I, or even before that, but World War I was like a really fairly modern thing where we're talking about Spitzer bullets, metallic cartridges. They thought they were going to be these really long engagements. They had rifles, a lot of the rifles metered out or incremented out to over 1,000 yards, over 1,000 meters. And they realized, well, that's kind of silly because most of this fighting is happening far, far closer. Practical warfighting distances, a flatter trajectory is nice, which you get with the 5.56. If you're just talking about, I want to shoot, and this is what point blank range means, I want to shoot center of mass for my given target and hit somewhere in that intended target without changing my point of aim, point of impact, without dialing dope on a scope, without this or without that, you're going to get a greater point blank range. And when you could say all the stuff you want about riflemanship and fieldcraft, but when you're getting shot at, when lead is flying both ways, you're probably going to react by aiming at the target. Hopefully you're going to react this way, not pee your pants, but you're going to react as aiming and firing. Shoot, move, communicate. You get a longer point blank range where you can aim at center of target and hit said target with the 5.56. Those are two pretty big advantages, but there's no free lunch. What do you give up? Well, if you hit the target, you're hitting it with far less power. Far less power. You remember those foot-pound numbers. And I've gotten some pushback from this and from people that I love and respect, but I don't know. I wasn't there for the actual, NATO trials when they were going to the 5.56 or the 2.23. I don't know if it was designed to wound rather than kill. That kind of makes sense to me, especially if you look at the numbers, because if the goal was to have a efficient killing cartridge, they probably would have stuck with the 308 or the 30-06 because those are pretty good ballistic performers. Now, certainly, if the enemy dies on the battlefield, nobody's going to cry about that. But if you look at the Cold War, which is what we were in the right after World War II, starting the Cold War, our main boogeyman that we created, whatever you want to say, was the Soviet Union. They have a massive land army of conscript soldiers. Whatever you might think about the Russians, they are still a civilized people. They still take care of their wounded. They still love their neighbor. They will take care of the wounded on a battlefield. And if you take somebody out of the fight for you, you wound them so much that they can't continue fighting, that's pretty much as good for you in that context as a kill. So in that case, you could see why the 5.56 makes sense. Whether that was a thing they considered or not, I don't know. I don't know. So I'm not going to tell you that's a fact. But it makes sense. However, we never fought that war, and hopefully we never will. We did fight several wars, of which I was a part of some combat tours, where we're fighting radical Islamic terrorists who are literal fanatics that love to cut off Christians' heads with dull knives. And they have no problem dying at all costs because they think they're going to get some virgins in heaven. Which is not true, and that religion is false, and I have no problem calling that out. You didn't come here for political correctness. But that's a different enemy, getting back to the scope of today. If they're trying to kill you even if they're wounded, they're not giving up, they're not seeking medical attention, they're just trying to kill you. That's it, at all costs. Yeah, then, maybe the 5.56 223 is not the best option for that. Now, continuing on with the 5.56, NATO was never really happy with the 55 grain loading. They did their own trials, and they settled on a 62 grain One of the Scandinavian countries, forgive me if I don't remember, but one of the Scandinavian countries came up with 62 grain load, as you might know as the M855. It's a heavier load. 62 grain is not a heavy projectile, but it's quite a bit heavier as far as percentiles go from a 55 grain bullet, right? So let's look at that one. Let's look at, well, since I'm on Wikipedia, they list the M855A1. They list a 62 grain at 3150. 62 grain at 3150 for 1371 foot-pounds. So pretty soon after this, you start seeing maybe this super high velocity, super lightweight philosophy is not as good as we initially thought. Let's look at a little bit heavier. And then you see even now with the Mark 262 going to a 77 grain projectile in some cases. So something tells me if we'd have been happy with the performance of the 5.56 223 since the 50s, it probably wouldn't have gone through as many changes. And there are heavier loadings in the 308. As far as there's all kinds for the civilian side, but for the military side, let's look at the 175 grain Mark 118. That's 175 at 2600 for 27 foot-pounds of energy. Again, either way, you're still comparing apples to oranges. Per the Torah, the Word of God, the same Word made flesh in John, the Gospel of John, the beginning of the Gospel of John. In the Torah, you shall not have in your bag differing weights, a heavy and a light. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a perfect and a just weight, and a perfect and a just measure. I try not to play favorites, right? I try not to get emotionally invested. Even if I have a favorite, recommending it to you, I'm trying to be impartial here. Which one is the better cartridge? I can't even say that because you're comparing apples to oranges. Again, that's like saying, what's the better vehicle? A Ford Focus or a Ford F-150? Well, do you pretty much just do commuting in city traffic from the suburbs to the city, 45 minutes every day and you have to pay for gas? Then probably the Ford Focus. If you don't live anywhere where there's no unpaved roads or anything like that, if you're a construction contractor and you haul 2x4s and bags of concrete and all kinds of other stuff, then probably the F-150 is a better choice for you. Really, what are you trying to do? And that's what we're going to spend the next part of this episode talking about. And we're already at 28 minutes. I don't want to break this into two parts because I've been doing a lot of the series episodes, and although I think they're important, like the series on truck guns or the series on the AR-15, they literally don't do as good. They don't do as good as far as views and stuff go when I break stuff down into a bunch of different segments. So let's continue on here. Let's march on. Talking about what are you trying to do with this cartridge, right? Because if you're in an application that favors one over the other, there's clearly going to be a best for that situation. I would say best for you, but you may have a couple of different applications in your life. But do you like to just go out and shoot for fun, for plinking? I think there's a reason the AR-15, I think the main reason the AR-15 has become America's rifle, that's not what it stands for, but it probably should, is, let's be honest, it's a lot of fun to shoot. It's very low in recoil. It's fun to shoot. It's a lot of fun to shoot because of economy of scale. It's probably the most affordable centerfire cartridge to shoot. I would have said a long time ago when surplus ammo was a thing, the 7.62 by 39, which I did a whole other episode on comparing that to the 5.56. Go back and look in the archives for that. But it's probably the most affordable centerfire cartridge. So here's the thing. Most Americans, most of the time, they go out and they shoot paper and or steel for funsies. And for that, the clear winner is the 5.56. If you're going out to just have fun and just shoot a rifle that's more powerful than a .22 long rifle, and you're just putting holes in paper, And that's great. I love that. Big competition shooter here. The 5.56, that's what you want. Or maybe not what you want, but that's what makes the most sense for that application. The rifles, if you're comparing apples to apples in those rifles, like a semi-auto to a semi-auto, probably a 5.56 is way more affordable if you're talking round per round. And let me get you some numbers on that. As of the time of this recording, in the year of our Lord, 2023, in the 11th month on the second day. Now, if you don't know about AmmoSeek, it's a search engine, much like looking for airline tickets. It's a great thing to use. It's a great tool to utilize. It will search the internet, and it's usually pretty good at finding actual in-stock ammo for the best prices. Wow, that's jumped up dramatically recently. Ammo shortage much? Anyway, the first listing for, and this is price per round for the 5.56 at the time of this recording, is 52 cents. And there are several in the 52 cent range. Let's go to the 7.62. If we look at the 308, 67 cents a round. If you're talking about high volume shooting and or training, because shooting is not per se training, and vice versa, there's a clear advantage there as far as price goes. So if your goal is to check the box of you want a decent centerfire rifle that is affordable to shoot, fun to shoot, without a lot of recoil, low barrier to entry, and you just want to check that box, the 5.56, the AR-15, that's your clear winner. And you could go with something else like a Mini 14 or something. This is not that episode. But advantage, 5.56. Also, if you want to, I guess if you wanted to store massive stockpile of ammo for a given budget, let's take the weight out of it, because if most people don't live like me as a nomad, most people have a domicile, a like stationary domicile, a place where they reside semi-permanently. We're all strangers and pilgrims on the earth, but you get what I mean. You're probably storing it in a garage, so weight doesn't really matter to you. But money probably does. So if you have, let's say, $100 every month allotted for ammo, you can buy more 5.56 with said $100 than you can with 308. So there you go. All right, so let's look at another case. You want a more powerful round. We talked about the 5.56 having a more or a greater point blank range. But if you're talking about energy at any distance, especially energy at long distance, advantage 308. If energy is something that is important to you, if you're not just punching holes in paper, if you're shooting actual things that you want to stop. And I say stop, not just kill, because that's relative, right? Where are you getting shot? Are you getting shot at the front steps of a hospital in the torso with either one of these rounds? Because probably you're a lot more likely to die with a 308. If you're getting shot somewhere in the middle of the Amazon jungle with no medical attention for 2 weeks, you're probably going to die from either one because of infection. But we're talking about stopping in relevance to a self-defense situation. Round per round, the 308 is the clear winner there. I hate to even throw out numbers, but let's say for argument's sake that you may have to shoot somebody center of mass several times with a 223, where even rounds in the same place you may only have to shoot them once with a 308. Do you need to stop somebody right now? And here's where that really plays into a lot of civilians. Hunting. If you're a deer hunter, an elk hunter, and I am, and although 308 is not my favorite cartridge for this, it's a good cartridge for this. I will concede that it's probably the most popular cartridge for this. So if you want a great crossover, because, yeah, you could kill a deer with a 223, and many people do, but let's say you shoot that deer, and it's an okay hit, not a great hit, because with a great hit it'd probably die either way, but it's an okay hit. Somewhere in the chest cavity, a lung shot. Did I mention in the bio as a professional big game hunter and guide, I've seen a lot of animals shot. Let's say you get an acceptable hit, but you're not a great tracker. And that you shoot this animal to eat it, right? And that animal runs off in such a way that you can't find it before the meat spoils. That stinks. Your clear advantage in this situation for hunting, and when I say hunting in America, the vast majority think of deer hunting, whether you're talking about the vast majority of people living east of the Mississippi, white-tailed deer, or where I am in Idaho, both whitetail and mule deer or blacktail or whatever you're talking about. Deer. If you're talking about hunting deer and up, elk, black bear, if you're talking about stopping power on those kind, where stopping power means I can shoot it and I can recover it to eat it more reliably, the clear advantage is the 308. Also talking about stopping power on vehicles, because vehicle rammings are a thing. Most of us live in urban, suburban areas. Stopping a vehicle, disabling a vehicle, both in a military context, a law enforcement context, a civilian context. If you're talking about that kind of stuff, the 308 is the clear winner. Also, let's talk about the context of artificial criteria, meaning like not the laws of physics, like man-made, malum prohibitum criteria. Like you live in a place where your right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed has in fact been infringed, right? So if you live in one of those areas where you can only have X amount of rounds, and let's say X is 10 because that's probably the most common number. If you can only have 10 rounds in your gun, you might want to say, I have less rounds, therefore each one of those rounds I want to be more effective. Now it's not just that. There's more that goes into that equation. I don't care how good you control recoil. If you reduce it, you control it better. So all of the things being equal, you can get faster follow-up shots with a 5.56 and a 308. That's a big advantage still. But if you can only have X amount of rounds, probably clearly going to steer you towards, well, I don't know, maybe you're still just punching paper, or maybe you're shooting prairie dogs. But if that's the case in a lot of contexts, you're going to go with a 308. It makes the most sense because of those malum prohibitum rules. Let's take it to the extreme. Let's say I have a single shot. Let's say for whatever reason in some crazy Orwellian future, the government limits me to single shot rifles. What a horrible future that would be. I get a single shot rifle to go out and go hunting with. Do I want a single shot 308 or do I want a single shot 223, right? Again, unless I'm hunting prairie dogs, if I'm hunting deer or deer-sized things, or for defense, if that's all I can have for defense, right? If it's a single shot, because follow-up shots are irrelevant to me, clear advantage, the 308. So look at it circumspectly. What are your main criteria? Is lightweight? Is affordable? Is point-blank range? Is fast follow-up shots important to you? Maybe make a spreadsheet, right? My wife loves spreadsheets. She got her master's degree. She makes a ton of money. And a lot of what she does is making spreadsheets. She can make all kinds of crazy spreadsheets, right? Maybe make on Excel a spreadsheet, and it's pretty easy to go from columns to a pie chart. Look at it circumspectly for you, not emotionally. Not maybe make a chart, make a pie chart, or just think about it circumspectly. What is most important to me? Are those things, the lightweight, the affordability of ammo, the faster follow-up shots? Is that more important to me, or is the more power, round per round effectiveness more important to me, right? For instance, if you want a decent crossover, like I want to be able to hunt deer, let's say I'm not the gun guy that has all kinds, and I don't have a lot of different calibers compared to a lot of people, I think, but let's say I'm going to standardize. I want a handgun caliber. I want a rimfire, 22 long rifle is the obvious choice. I want a handgun caliber, proper centerfire handgun, 9mm, easy choice there for most people. Not everybody, but most people. And I want to standardize a rifle cartridge. Are you going to hunt and defend? Are those both part of your genre, right? Do you live in a place? Do you even hunt? Because I've often thought about this as far as survival goes, and I guess I realize that I'm not like most people in a lot of ways. Right? But especially in this way. I grew up hunting. I grew up putting meat on the table. It's something that I like to do. But a lot of people grow up in people hives, in suburbs. They've never killed an animal in their whole life. In fact, when I was a cop, I often got to dispatch animals in the city, especially deer, which I really enjoyed. A lot of cops didn't even want to do it because they just didn't know how. They didn't want to touch it. They didn't want to kill an animal. A lot of people are in that camp. But if hunting is something that you're interested in, or that you do, if you want a cartridge that's good at both, because you can kill a deer with a 223, you can kill a deer with a lot of things. But if you want the clear winner, there is the 308. if you care about power, not just in deer hunting, but in like barrier penetration, vehicles, walls. If you want more energy at range, like you live in a wide expanse. You live in Wyoming. I'm in northern Idaho right now, but Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, places like that where you may shoot things at longer range. The 223 is a marginal deer caliber at best with really good ammo selection and really conservative ranges. You start getting outside any of those parameters, 308's the clear winner there. It's the clear winner there. Do you just want a carbine to keep in your truck and go out and shoot at the range? You mostly have it as a break contact thing. There's some sticky situations, some riding, some civil unrest, some whatever. You want this as a tool to escape and evade. And you mostly want to go out and shoot paper. You don't have a lot of budget for ammo. In that case, right, for you, I would say the very common 5.56 and AR-15 is a decent choice. So, what's best is a ridiculous question for this. There is no best. It's comparing apples to oranges. It's like saying what's better, an aircraft carrier or a nuclear-powered submarine. They're both vessels. They both go forth in the ocean, but they're completely different roles, right? There is no best. You can't compare them. They're so different. Best for what? What are you doing? What's best for you here, the 5.56 or the 308? Let's talk about a big one, as I am a prepper, a survivalist, and I don't apologize for that. If you said you can only have one long gun for the peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan scenario, and there's no caveats, there's not like it's this specific scenario, not like whatever doomsday preppers where they're like, I'm preparing for, what do they prepare for? Peak oil in 2025. Right? No. Like, you don't know, but stuff is about to radically be different in the world that we live in today. You have to pick one long gun. Well, for me, it's not even going to be a rifle. I've said this before, I'm going to pick a shotgun. It's the most versatile tool. But let's say that you're pressing me and you say you have to pick a rifle. For me, I'm going to pick a 308. I'm going to pick the Scar 17. Again, with no other caveats. There are plenty of times where I pick the 5.56. But I have a Scar 17. I'm very blessed to have that gun. I would forego the lightweight of the ammo, and I'm not a big dude. Right? I'm not, 7 foot tall and 350 pounds of pure muscle. But I'm a fit dude. I can carry weight. I get the firepower versus mobility equation. Believe me, as somebody that rucks pretty regularly, I totally get it. But although I can carry less rounds, to me, each one of those rounds being more effective is more important. Also, I like living west of the Missouri, but let's say west of the Mississippi River. If I was just trapped east of the Mississippi, I'd probably pick the 5.56, which is where most people live. Because although there are some big black bears east of the Mississippi, and I grew up hunting black bear, took my first black bear with a bow when I was 15 or 16, 17, somewhere in there, if I can remember correctly. But aside from the freakishly large black bear, there's really nothing east of the Mississippi where you need a big round. It's a people hive. There's way, in my opinion, there's a ton of people east of the Mississippi, high population density. And my first thing, if peanut butter and chocolate hit the fan east of the Mississippi, would be to leave, to get west of the Mississippi. As Pastor Joe Fox, Viking Preparedness, says, I don't think he's even aware of me doing his podcast, but he says, and very wisely, the two things that'll get you are starvation and people behaving badly. Those are both way more prevalent where there's a lot more people. So my first thing will be to get out. If I've got to travel 1,000 miles on foot, then the equation starts to change to something a little bit lighter. Or if it's an urban people hive where, east of the Mississippi, how often do you get a shot past 100 yards or 50 yards? Go out in your natural environment, aside from standing in the middle of the street or a highway, and try and see past 300 yards in the southeast, unless you're on like a bean field. And then in what scenario are you going to be walking across a field? If you have any kind of fieldcraft at all, you're not going to do that. So in most urban environments, you're talking close-up shooting. And you might be talking about many, many people. If I'm talking about the follow-up shooting, either multiple hits on one target or target transitions, getting one hit on each target, and then changing their behavior and breaking contact, advantage 5.56. So again, what do you do? Where do you live? What are you trying to do? Case in point here from real world firsthand experience. Probably why you come here, hopefully, because there's a lot of entertaining gun content out there. I was the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters. Massive violence, that was our bread and butter. In a large metropolitan area. I was blessed to be the commander of the tactical team to stop active shooters. I was blessed to be the commander of that. I was chosen, by God's grace, to lead that, to develop that, no less, to write the policies and procedures. I wrote the uniform policy, the handgun policy, the use of force policy. I also wrote the long gun policy, the rifle policy. And I wrote that in such a way as to allow a lot of freedom for the men, because I hired shooters. I hired gunfighters. I fired them too, but I hired gunfighters, like mostly military experience, Marines, Army, combat vets, law enforcement, IDF guys, competitive shooters, like the real deal. And I had confidence in them. We made our qualification pretty legit. Like, our training was not just a shoe-in. It wasn't like, here you go, here's a 10 star, like, congratulations. It was actually like, it was not an easy thing to achieve. And I had confidence in my men that they were decent shooters. They were real gunfighters. And I'm honored and blessed to have served any one of them. So for all the guys that I served with as the commander of that tactical team that listen, I appreciate not what you did for me, but what you did for the country, what you did for your community. But anyway, in writing that long gun policy, I gave them a lot of freedom. They could choose what they wanted. They could run what they wanted. And let me talk about me and my personal experience. I would vacillate between the two, right? Between 5.56 and 308. Sometimes I would run an AR, usually what is now considered an SBR, just a pistol brace short AR. Sometimes I would run a SCAR 17, a SCAR Heavy 308. Vastly, they're both tactical rifles, but again, pretty much apples and oranges. Well, there were some times where I was doing PSD work, right, personal security details, where I was guarding, let's say, dignitaries, heads of state, without getting too specific, like people of the Secret Service that I worked with. Like that was a thing, to work with the Secret Service, because I knew the terrain, I knew the area, I knew the ingress and egress points. I would work with them. If I'm doing a personal security detail, if I'm working a 12-hour shift, where our main thing is to protect that person, and if something were to happen, I might need to fire, mostly to break contact, and then evac that person. Right? For that, a small PDW, a small AR pistol makes a lot of sense. Also, if we're doing that, we're doing a lot of vehicle convoy stuff in and out. Right? That's a clear advantage. 5.56 AR, lighter, especially if I'm carrying it for 12 hours. And the goal is kind of to break contact. Because if the adversary's main goal is assassination, right, then my job is to extricate the person who's the target of the assassination. Switch, our main job was to stop active shooters. Now, if I'm in a large area, I would also write many, not all, I would sometimes delegate this out, but many times I would write the operations orders. And I would place a guy or two that I thought was up to the task in a quasi-designated marksman role at a giant venue. Like, you're talking tens of thousands of people in a really small, compact area. If an active shooter broke out, for that, I'd want the SCAR 17. I'd want the 308. I want one or two decisive rounds, delivering substantial energy, possibly at distance, to stop that threat. I don't care that I get less rounds in the 308 than the 5.56, so that I can carry less rounds, because in what world, in that scenario where there's tens of thousands of people in crowded, tight-knit space, right? That's why there's probably the massive threat of an active shooter there, because there's a lot of people in a small area. It's a target-rich environment, sadly. But in what scenario would it be okay for me to shoot 10 rounds And that's far beneath the capability of either one of those weapons. In what scenario would that be okay? Like, if there's an active shooter, and there's all those people around, I should be judicious with my marksmanship and fire few and effective rounds. Clear advantage there, 308, SCAR 17. Also, and this was a real thing, if there was a threat of a vehicle ramming, if that was our main threat for that mission, a vehicle ramming, clear advantage, 308. If I'm trying to stop a vehicle, I want 308. I don't want 223. Even with the green tip, I don't want it. I want 308. That's a pretty clear example there, a real world example from my own experience. Which one? Well, what are you trying to do? If you are interested in, I just did an episode, I actually didn't do it, I re-put it out and it did a lot better the second time, I think. But I just did an episode on maximizing the AR-15, meaning the AR-15 and 5.56 for survival. If you're interested in the 5.56, if that's the side you land on, you may look at that. Anyway, with that, there's a lot of other caveats. There's a lot of other yeah, but this and yeah, but that. Like, we basically talked about the vanilla loads for both of these. You can do a lot to the 5.56 with different loadings. Especially like if you're talking about hunting with the solid copper loads. But you can also do a lot with the 308. And I'm not even saying these are the best rounds. I actually don't think they are. I wouldn't choose either one of these. If I was like equipping the military, I wouldn't go with either one of these, and I wouldn't go with the 277 Fury. But the fact is, in the world we live in, as far as economy of scale goes, these are by far the two most popular, I think, centerfire rifle rounds. So these are probably the two that you consider the most. For availability of ammo, for economy of scale. Right, as far as manufacturer goes, let's take an easy example. There's a little bit of difference between the 223 Remington and the earlier, older 222 Remington. But as far as manufacturing cost goes, material cost goes, let's call it a wash, right? Let's call it even. But go look at the price of what you can get 223 for versus what you can get 222 Remington for. Right, just right there, even if, and it's not, but even if the 222 was a better round, I'd almost in no circumstances other than specialty, like I was entering a rock chuck shooting tournament, right? I would almost certainly never choose a 222 Remington, which is why it's kind of a dead round, economy of scale. Just to illustrate a point, economy of scale, these are your two probably most readily available, easily attainable, affordable, mass-produced rounds. So that's why we're talking about these two, even though they're apples and oranges. Which one is best to you? Now, when these come out, if you listen on Spotify, there should be a thing on there, ask me your questions. It's usually I'm asking you a question and you answer, but I flipped that a while ago, and my thing was, ask me a question. You can ask me a question about this or anything else, but which side do you land on? Are you a 5.56 guy or a 308 guy? I would love to hear. Or if you say, you're an idiot, you didn't mention this, and this, that's fine. Right? I was a Marine. I got pretty thick skin. As long as it's right respectful and not obscene, because if you're using obscenity, it's probably because you can't articulate a point. Especially in writing, I get it if you like hit your hand with a hammer or something, right? I've been there. But you should be able to articulate without using foul language. But if you do that respectfully, but if you submit a respectful comment, perhaps I'll read it on a podcast. If you want to contact me, again, if you listen on Spotify, you can interact that way. It's a cool thing Spotify does. If you, and I'm not even, that's not even my web host, I just put out my episodes there as well as Apple. But anyway, if you want to contact me other than that, you can contact me at goodshepherdtraining.com. goodshepherdtraining.com. I would love to hear from you. If you want to consider supporting the podcast, the patrons, especially the insider group, the insider chat, we chat all the time, on the daily, except for Sabbath, in which I rest. But if you want a little bit more interaction, or you're having analysis paralysis, I'm trying to decide between the new Ruger SFAR 308 and an M1A Springfield. Like, what do I do? I've been there. I've got analysis paralysis. I've been recently looking at scout scopes, and I got analysis paralysis. I get that. sometimes it's helpful to have a knowledgeable third party to help you. That alone is just one of the small benefits you can get with Patreon. Anyway, thank you for listening. I am humbled and blessed that you listen, that you come here for advice. If you want to step up, if you want to man up and actually be an active member of the tribe, you want to actively support something, you don't just want to get it for free, you want to actually help and support, there should be a Patreon link in the show notes, or a Venmo link if you just want to throw a couple of bucks, or again, goodshepherdtraining.com. With that, your tactical tip of the day. You ever remember those commercials from, I don't know, I don't have TV, I haven't had TV in a long time, maybe they still had these kind of commercials, but like the infomercial. The early one that I remember was the Ginsu knife. Whatever they said, right? It dices, it slices, it chops, it can cut through a shoe. Whatever they said, I don't really remember, but you get the idea. There was like, the Sham Wow, right? Whatever. But there is something that almost sounds like an infomercial, but it predates an infomercial. I think it goes back to World War I or even earlier. The Germans came up with it. It's called Ballistol. Right? It predates any infomercial. But if there was ever like an infomercial-worthy product for the gun and tactical world, it's probably Ballistol. Right? It's good. It's a good solvent. It's not the best lubricant, but it's a much better than no lubricant. It's a decent lubricant. It's not toxic. This is way before the whole green movement, like cow flagellation is going to ruin the earth. We're talking about, it's just a really good product. Not only is it good for guns and cleaning and gun lubrication, it's also good for leather. It's good for wood, which, you're probably not rubbing hops number 9 on your wood. It's good for all of that. It's good for your leather shoes, your leather boots. It also cleans wounds. Yes, it cleans and disinfects wounds. I don't know what the best all-around survival round for you is, but I'm going to tell you probably the best all-around product like this for your bug-out bag, for your bugging in plan to have stockpiled for treating all kinds of stuff, if you want the stuff that you have to last, is probably Ballistol, right? Now, it's not what I use mostly for lubrication, but if that's all that I had, I would be happy that I had it. And it does a lot. Right, it cleans wounds. You see where I'm talking about? It kind of sounds like an infomercial. And it's got a long track record, right? Well over 100 years. So, Ballistol. If you don't know about it, no affiliation. We're not sponsored by Ballistol, right? But, I say we. But, not sponsored by Ballistol. It's just a really good product. So, if you're looking for a good product to have on hand for a myriad of things, I just remember that I had some this morning and I was doing some work on my daily wearing boots, African Ranger boots, and grabbed the Ballistol. Had me thinking about it. Also uses it to clean up and treat a knife this morning. Again, Ballistol. Anyway, that's your tactical tip of the day. Hopefully what you care about more, and more than the entire episode, more than 556 versus 223. Because whatever, right? If I'm private contracting, you give me one and let me loose on Hamas. Whatever, I don't care. The training and the warrior mentality and the skill is far more important than the cartridge. Remember that. But hopefully what you care about more than this entire podcast and talking about ballistics is the tactical verse of the day. And whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God, the Father, through him. Whatever you're doing in life, right? Whether you're working in a cubicle 9 to 5, whether you're selling cars or pouring concrete, or the vast array, you're an IT guy, right? The vast array of things that we do, that you could do. Whatever you do, sometimes it's easy to get jaded and think, I don't really feel like doing this today. Even me on podcasting, I really am blessed to be able to do this, but there's days I just don't want to talk into a microphone, right? But remember, whatever you do, in whatever you do, serve God in what you do. That gives your life purpose. Not necessarily your job, not your title, not what kind of tie you wear, not what kind of shoes you wear. The fact that you serve God, that you were chosen by God, the fact that you were made in his very own image, that gives your life value. Whatever you do, remember to do it Do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God, the Father, through him.